Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and welcome to 2024. This is going to be a special episode of ESW, our year-end wrap-up for 2023. In this episode, we'll be discussing our mindset coming into the year from 2022, how 2023 kicked off, some special themed episodes we recorded in 2023, the state of the fragile and recovering startup market, key acquisitions in 2023, and some acquisition rumors that never really led to anything, breach post-mortems and special lessons learned episodes that we did in 2023, some notable drama and dumpster fires, some themes and trends, and our favorite newsletters, books, and tools from 2023. All that and more on this special year-end wrap-up episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is a very special episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. It's our year-end wrap-up for 2023. If you want to see what we were thinking about coming into 2023, you can also go back and listen to the second segment of episode 300. That was our 2022 end-of-year wrap-up. It's just going to be me today, no co-hosts, and we're doing this as kind of a standalone wrap-up instead of part of a normal episode. So we're not counting this as an episode. We'll pick up again with episode, I think, 245 on January 11th, so a week from this Thursday. We'll be back with you with a normal format. But for now, we're going to do a bit of a wrap-up here. And before I start talking about 2023, I want to do a little bit of our 2022 wrap-up of what we were thinking coming into this year. So in 2022 on this podcast, we discussed cryptocurrency and NFTs a lot. I think that was the year that NFTs just got ridiculous. And we talked about the Joe Sullivan case, and we did a post-mortem on one of the Uber breaches. I think several Uber breaches happened that year, but the one that was done by the teenagers that got recently arrested. So that, the reason we did a postmortem on that is, they're partially doing it for attention, and they talked a lot about the different methods they used and how they got in and all that, which gave us a lot of good content, a lot of good lessons learned to focus on. And new posture management markets were popping up everywhere. I think we talked a lot about data security posture management that year, application security posture management, identity security posture management, SaaS security posture management. Those segments really took off. I think we did some interviews with some founders in the data security posture management space back in 2022. We did some specials in 2022. We had Tyler Robinson come on and explain NFTs to us and to some extent cryptocurrency. So we had a good technical discussion there, understanding what they're being used for, how they might have value. Of course, we have the benefit of hindsight now, and we saw much of both of those markets kind of drop out and go away. A lot of the hype got stripped away. Of course, they still exist. They still have value, but they're not really being talked about that much this year. So we got a break from having to talk about crypto and NFTs this year. We had a special on SOAR where we had somebody from a vendor and somebody from the practitioner side on one episode talk about SOAR. We had an all lawyer special, and we started our series, our somewhat quarterly series of having VC on to talk about the state of the market back in 2022. And of course, in the first half of 2022, we had these great unicorn graphics that our production crew would throw up on the screen for us because we saw half a dozen, 2, 3 to as many as half a dozen new security unicorns popping up every month. And that abruptly stopped in June of 2022. Which was roughly the same month we started seeing big layoffs in the industry. So we kind of saw the market drop out there. and we saw things get pretty crazy. So we even had a graph. I put together a graph of that, just showing how the unicorns started out, immediately dropped off, and then you saw this. We had this blue line showing the layoffs go to infinity, starting with one trust laying off nearly 1,000 people. So that kind of that market and the state of the market was a lot of what we talked about in 2022. We had guests on. We were asking them, how long do you think this is going to last? And I think we have a better idea now. We also spent much of 2023 talking about the state of the market and how many companies are going to get killed by it, and when we're going to see it come back, and when we're going to see hiring come back, right? See what else. So yeah, we were talking about whether when we were going to see the industry's first decacorn, and I don't think we've seen a single, but maybe we've seen one unicorn since. Trying to remember who that might have been, but yeah, I think we've maybe had one unicorn since, and we only had one company go public since that market dropped out, which I believe was Yubico. And the reason most people didn't hear about it is they went public in Sweden, on the Sweden's version of the NASDAQ. So they didn't go public here in the US. All right, now jumping up to 2023, we still have, as I said, a broken market. So we're very focused on the state of the market, what's going to happen there, particularly to late stage funded companies, companies that have a higher burn, have more employees. We're really looking forward to those $100+ million funding raises, and didn't happen. The number, you could probably count on one or two hands the number of large late stage funding rounds that we saw. And even those weren't typical VC rounds. Those might have been debt financing or some other kind of creative funding or financing. Instead, we still saw a lot of Series A, a lot of seed funding, but a lot of them were for new markets, were for things like, anything with AI in the name, right? Anybody using AI or trying to secure AI. So to some extent, it looked like some of the VCs might have been cutting their losses, weren't going to continue funding some of their earlier rounds of funding. And also the split we saw is often where early stage VCs will hand off to later stage VCs. And I think in a lot of cases, those handoffs didn't happen. So we saw a lot of acquisitions this year. In fact, I went back through all of our episodes and I saw we talked about, or at least in the show notes, we had 263 different funding rounds. There were a lot more than that. Those were just the ones I thought were interesting enough to include in the show notes. We included 30 new companies. Again, there were hundreds of new companies. Those were just the ones I thought were interesting enough to include in the notes. And we saw 70 acquisitions. Again, way more actual acquisitions than that, probably in the hundreds. But those were 70 that we thought were interesting enough to discuss on the show and to talk about. I think a lot of those acquisitions might have been those companies that knew they weren't going to make that leap from early stage to late stage, knew they'd have trouble raising the next round. So an early exit was maybe a better option for them. And early in the year, Tyler Shields and I penned some posts on his Substack called the Cyber Why for what we were calling zombie corns. And that was the term we basically gave these companies that weren't going to raise another round, but still had a lot of money, still had momentum, still had a lot of people, but maybe not enough to survive. So we're still very much in that kind of holding space for a lot of these companies. They had enough money in the bank that they're not gone yet. They haven't exited. In a lot of cases, we saw companies weren't very accepting of the new price, the new valuation that their company might have. We saw Cybereason lost 90% of their value. Sneak is the way that's pronounced, but you might be more used to seeing it spelled SYNK. Lost, I think, 50% of its value. And I think that's why we didn't see more larger acquisitions this year is a lot of companies just weren't ready to accept that their valuation had dropped that much, or maybe they're hoping they can hold out until the market goes back to some kind of normalcy and they can get a bigger exit, which is a big risk. The bigger you get, the tougher it is to get that exit, and tougher it is to get the exit terms that you want. So, that's something to look forward to in 2024 to see how that plays out for a bunch of these companies. We saw a bunch of companies go under. So IronNet was a big drama. There was a lawsuit involved in that, maybe several lawsuits. A couple times it looked like the company might be saved. They delisted from the NASDAQ and eventually went into bankruptcy, the kind of liquidation bankruptcy that you don't come back from, not the restructuring kind. So that we talked about that quite a bit. With all the drama around that, we continued to talk about layoffs early in the years. Layoffs became so normal, we stopped talking about them and stopped including them in the show notes. And let's see, other companies, since I'm talking about it, let me find in my notes the other companies that shut down. Siren was a company that had been around, Israeli security company, had been around for decades that shut down. So that was kind of that wasn't a typical thing. We didn't see a lot of that happen. That was kind of a unique case where, I think they had been spinning down for quite a while, and they were focused on, markets that were less interesting, like preventing spam and, corners of email security that had just become very commoditized. We saw a company called Apora go away, Redacted, which, kind of irritated us with their name because for a while we thought the name just wasn't being released. And then we realized the actual name of the company was Redacted, open bracket, redacted, close bracket. So they went under. Blue Lava also stopped operations, and then in the 11th hour, I think got acquired by somebody. I forget who acquired them. And there were several more, but those are the ones we talked about on the show. All right. Let's see. What else? The impact of Elon Musk taking over Twitter resulted in the InfoSec community getting somewhat broken up. Now, for a number of years, the community had been spreading out into Discords and Slacks and things like that. So I don't think it was as big of a deal as it might have been if this happened 5 or more years ago. But still, Twitter was still very active. It was still the place where a lot of InfoSec congregated, especially the thought leaders, the very social people who built a brand. Myself, for 10 years, all my jobs came from connections and people that I knew off of Twitter, so it was very eventful and personally for me and my career. And we one of our first episodes of 2023, we talked to Jerry Bell, who started up infosec.exchange, which is probably one of the most popular Mastodon servers out there and is one of the key places that people jump to. So I think we're realizing there really isn't a replacement for Twitter. A lot of people just left and didn't pick up another social network. Some are on Threads, some are on Mastodon, some are on Blue Sky. But for the most part, I think we lost a good chunk of that kind of centralized sense of community that was there on Twitter, and I don't think it's coming back, at least not in a similar format to that. I think we're going to continue to be scattered about. So that was an interesting trend that kicked off the year. We had several special episodes this year. I try and do these as much as I can. Sometimes they're really planned out. Sometimes it's more happenstance. I noticed that we have 2 related interviews coming up, and I do my best to get them on the same show so that we can put them together. This year we had the Quantum Special, which was a long time coming. It was something that I definitely put together from the start and intended to be a special just on quantum computing. And I wanted to set that up so that we had a primer on quantum computing to understand what stage is quantum computing at, what can you do with it, can you do anything useful, what are people actually using it for, how easy is it to get started with it. And we got exactly that. IBM was kind enough to let us interview Kayla Lee. And I had some trouble finding the second part of that, which was going to dive into the security side of things, particularly post-quantum encryption, which is the idea that at some point quantum computers could be functional enough that we could break existing encryption algorithms with it. And the question was, okay, what algorithms? What's the timeline here? How usable is it? When are these post-quantum encryption algorithms coming? And again, IBM was kind enough to lend us the gentleman who penned, I think, 75%, like 3 out of the 4 NIST accepted post-quantum encryption algorithms. So we're very lucky to have Vadim Lubashevsky join us for the second part of that quantum special. And I got all my questions answered. I was super happy with that episode. I'm glad it came together the way it did, and answered most of my questions. And the TLDR of it is we don't know when quantum computing is going to be functional enough for that to happen. Just error correction it isn't quite there with quantum computers yet, so they're not all that usable. It's mostly a lot of testing going on right now, a lot of research work, and they're just going to have to get bigger. We're going to need more qubits to be able to do any kind of error correction, and all that has to happen before I think we'll see anybody breaking any kind of encryption with it. And the other part of that TLDR is those post-quantum encryption algorithms are already available, and they're already built into your web browser, and they're already built into web servers today. We haven't seen 100% adoption of that stuff, but I came out of that special thinking, okay, we're pretty well prepared for, some of the worst case scenarios here. I mean, if somebody's, states have recorded a bunch of encrypted communications. Yes, one day maybe they can decrypt that stuff that they've already collected that was encrypted with these old algorithms. So I don't know. Maybe on the day quantum computers are functional enough to start breaking and decrypting encrypted stuff and breaking those algorithms, we can see a lot of weird stuff going on. But it seems like we got started on this soon enough to avoid the bulk of the bad stuff that could come out of that. So that was episode 315. If you want to check out the quantum special, the other big special we did was on AI, particularly large language model. We focused on in that special. Daniel Miessler came on, and his podcast, his newsletter, and some of his consulting are very focused on AI LLMs. He's done a lot of testing himself on his own workflows, his own day-to-day stuff, and he's incorporated AI into that heavily. We had a great conversation, and then we had Alex Babin come on, who is, I forget the name of his company now, but go check out episode 320. His company actually kind of builds these turnkey custom LLM workflows for companies and helps them build that into their internal needs and build custom workflows there. So very interesting episode. We talked a lot about AI both at the end of 2022 and throughout 2023, so much so that we had special categories just for AI. We had AI tools category, AI news categories, and covered a lot of that stuff because it's really moved quickly, and it can still have a big impact on security. In fact, towards the end of the year, I'd say the bulk of a lot of the funding we saw were for AI-specific companies, AI companies who are trying to focus on protecting, providing security around LLMs. Some of them it's as simple as like a browser plugin that makes sure you don't input company intellectual property or proprietary data into the LLM, or on the other end, make sure that secrets and confidential stuff don't pop out on the other side. So we're going to continue to see that evolve. I think we're going to see a lot more private LLMs, private GPTs, if you want to think about it like that, that people use inside their company so that they don't have to use a third party like OpenAI to do that. if they don't trust them. All right. Let's see. Acquisitions. We saw a lot of interesting acquisitions this year. First off, there were some rumors that never really led to anything. I think the craziest one of those was that Wiz was going to acquire SentinelOne. This never happened. S1 was so angry about this rumor, they killed their partnership with Wiz. And then a little bit later on, we found out that it was actually Cisco looking at acquiring SentinelOne. And this was one of those cases where Cisco didn't believe that they were worth that much, that there was this drop in valuation. S1 felt like they were worth closer to $10 billion, whereas Cisco was only willing to pay somewhere in the area of $6 to $7 billion. And these are all rumors. None of this has been confirmed. But yeah, the rumors is they couldn't come to the table on a common price or get even close. So no acquisition of SentinelOne happened. No Name Security was rumored to be acquired for hundreds of millions. Never happened. Rapid7 was also reportedly exploring a private equity deal to take them private, and that didn't happen either. Some big acquisitions that did happen. Sumo Logic got picked up by Francisco Partners. Thoma Bravo picked up Magnet Forensics for $1.3 billion. The Sumo Logic one was $1.7 billion. I think the biggest acquisition we saw last year was later in the year when Cisco picked up Splunk for $28 billion. Splunk is not pure play security, but still, they do enough security stuff that we included that. Palo Alto picked up two companies for a combined $1 billion. They picked up Talon. And again, these aren't the exact numbers. I haven't dug those out of SEC filings, but the rumors were that they paid $400 million for Dig Security and $625 million for Talon for one of our two enterprise browsers that raised almost a record Series A. Both Talon and Island raised a ton of money. And it was interesting to see one of them exit this early. So again, we think that was the impact of the down market here, where, following up 100 million plus Series A was just really tough in this market. So it was a better deal for them to exit, I guess, at this point. We'll see what happens with Island, who's still private. They haven't been picked up. They haven't had an exit. We saw some of these posture management companies that we were talking about a lot in 2022 have exits. Zscaler picked up Canonic, which was considered the first SaaS security or SSPM acquisition, though they not really an SSPM, if you look at the definitions of it, but still considered the first acquisition in that area. Rubrik picked up Laminar, which was a data security posture management company. IBM picked up Polar Security, another DSPM. Let's see if we have anything else interesting here. Cisco acquired Armor Blocks, which was touted as an AI acquisition, which, Armor Blocks does email security. So that read kind of like a last minute pivot to have an exit. Honeywell picked up SCADA Fence. So interesting to see a big SCADA provider pick up a SCADA security company. Thales acquired Imperva for $3.6 billion. Imperva's been around forever. I think we're all surprised that it went for such a small amount there. And Travelers Insurance picked up Corvus Insurance. So it was interesting to see a security insurtech get picked up by a big name insurance firm. All right. Next up, we did some post-mortems, and this is something I've been focusing on for 7 or 8 years as a personal research project, trying to understand why companies fail, why companies have security failures. And we took several opportunities to focus on some of the bigger breaches, again, particularly the ones where we have enough details to really dive in and find some lessons learned and share those with you, with our audience. The first of those was Circle CI, which we discussed in episode 303 and 304. The second of those was the Microsoft Storm breach. We discussed in episode 324 and then in 331 when more details came out. I believe that was because Microsoft released their final report on that investigation, which we weren't completely satisfied with because it never told us how their engineer initially got hit by this attack. And, again, it's just one of those, if Microsoft can't stop these attacks, how are we supposed to with the same tools that they're giving us that we're using with Microsoft 365? But, there was a state-sponsored attack. I believe it was attributed to China, and it's always going to be tough to stop those. Basically all the funding they need and all the time they need, they're going to get in. Talked a little bit about MGM in episode 331, though the issue there is all the details for that breach came from the attackers. So we kind of have to take that with a grain of salt anytime that happens. The details sounded legit, but you never know. They could be making stuff up. We didn't really do much of a post-mortem on that because I believe I saw that the U.S. government was going to do an investigation into it. So we'll likely get a public formal report like we did with Equifax back in 2018. And I'll just wait for that. We'll have much better quality details in there, and just a much thorough investigation of what happened there. So looking forward to that report when it comes out. In Equifax's case, it took 18 months for the House subcommittee report to come out. So I don't know how long we'll have to wait for the MGM one, but that was a pretty big one. Interesting given that Caesars was attacked around the same time and chose to pay the ransom, and looks like their losses were much, much smaller, even though they paid an 8-digit ransom. MGM was talking about damages in lost profits in excess of like $100 million, something like that. We did a whole segment this year in episode 334 on just lessons learned from the previous year's breaches. So I think this was a case where we had a guest cancel on us pretty last minute. And there are a bunch of reports out there. We've seen some great reports come out of security vendors on how ransomware crews, the different tactics that they use, how they get into companies, how companies get breached. And I used a bunch of different resources to pull this together, and we did that whole segment in episode 334. So check that out if you just want to see a concise, non-specific overview of how companies are getting hacked these days. And then finally, in episode 340, we did a lessons learned post-mortem on, and again, this was a dedicated segment entirely on the Okta support site breach, where the attackers got access to HAR files, which had OAuth keys in them, which led to them getting into 5 companies, 3 of which we know the identity of, 1Password, Beyond Trust, and Cloudflare. Because all 3 of those companies shared their experiences and shared their own postmortems. So that was a really interesting case where we got a lot of details from security vendors. Security vendors were targeted in this attack against Okta. And that was a super interesting segment. I recommend checking that out also if you want a nice, concise segment just on how attackers are getting in. And in this case, all 3 of those vendors I mentioned looked like they stopped them pretty quickly in the attack. So a lot of positive lessons to be learned there. I think Zero Trust was a big winner there. The use of isolation to prevent them from getting too far into the organization. And all 3 of those companies I mentioned that got hit because Okta got breached, detected pretty quickly, like in minutes or hours. And, so good on them for that as well. So some themes we saw in 2023, moving on here. Understanding how breaches work. So I just mentioned all those postmortems we did and all the reports coming out from vendors. If you've got some extra time, just scrape through the show notes from last year's segments from episode 341 to episode 344. Almost every week, we had some kind of great report detailing the things defenders can do. And one of the last reports we looked over was a meta report from Scientia Institute that looked at the MITRE ATT&CK framework and how many of those TTPs are actually being used by attackers. And the result is surprisingly few of them. I think it was less than 5% of the MITRE ATT&CK framework ever gets used in real life, which is not a dig on MITRE ATT&CK or the framework at all. The framework is intended to be a dictionary of all the different types of attacks that can be used. It's not implying that all of them will get used in the same way that a language dictionary isn't, is a compilation of all language that could be used, right? Like a lot of that we don't use. There's a lot of words that are not in our vocabularies, and that's normal. So good to understand, for anyone that's trying to go through MITRE ATT&CK framework as if they have to defend against all those attacks. I'm really glad that we're now seeing this kind of heat map research into, okay, here's the ones that are actually happening that you should actually prepare to defend against. So I think it's really important for us to do that and focus our efforts where they can make the biggest difference. So some of the other trends here, we've seen defenders shift away from putting more resources into a lot of prevention work like vulnerability management. We've not seen the ability in most organizations to patch before the attacker can take advantage of an exploit, particularly 0 days. So we've seen a lot of companies, just call it good enough and put their resources elsewhere, like in detection engineering, better visibility, and better incident response, more practice. Since it looks more and more like breaches are going to be inevitable for most companies in this modern time. So more anti-malware, more vulnerability management, probably not going to save you, especially when, most attacks involve tricking a human into doing something that they shouldn't do. Seems like that's what we should be preparing for, not trying to install a patch a couple hours quicker. So, again, different companies, different environments, your needs, your risk tolerance may be different. I can't speak for everybody. That's just a trend that we're starting to see, or that we saw a lot in 2023. So let's see, we talked about companies that shut down. So regulations, we've seen that spin up quite a bit. White House released their national cybersecurity strategy. We saw a lot happening in Australia, in the EU, here at home in the US. We saw SEC requirements for reporting breaches come out towards the end of the year. So certainly regulations are starting to catch up with this. And I think some of the areas for cybersecurity, for InfoSec, we really do need those regulations to make stuff happen. Just having a breach isn't fixing security. Security isn't a problem that's solving itself through negative outcomes alone. So there has to be, I think, some enforcement here. I think I've been brought to that realization over time. Cyber insurance is also trying to figure out how to make it work. We've had a lot of folks on talking about cyber insurance. It continues to evolve. We talked about Travelers Insurance picking up Corvus. There's a lot of insurtechs out there that are moving away from pricing policies based on a questionnaire that you fill out once when you want the policy, right? And we're seeing it move more towards real-time visibility and monitoring. So insurance companies that are actually going to pick up a phone and say, "Hey, why did you open RDP to the public internet?" You need to justify that decision. And if they're going to pay out on some of these policies, if there are going to be claims, it's up to them how hard they want to look at, how you're driving the company, right? We often made the the analogy to the auto insurance companies that offer lower rates for folks who put a device in their car, to collect telemetry showing that they actually are a safe driver. They don't just say they are. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with cyber insurance there. We saw a lot of companies pull out of providing cyber insurance a couple of years back. The ones that are still in it are trying to figure out a better way to price policies and to lessen claims, prevent claims. So they seem somewhat aligned with companies trying to defend against attacks here. So we'll see what happens there in the future. AI news dominated most of our news segments. Already mentioned that. We had special categories just for AI stuff. GPT-4 hit, I think, 3 months into the year. We saw a lot of products jumping on the new LLM technologies, the availability of them. Microsoft released approximately 800 AI products branded Copilot. None of us can keep up with it. Microsoft branding is probably the biggest challenge for anybody reporting on tech news or security news in the industry. But it's certainly getting shoved into a lot of products. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's not. I think my favorite AI product so far has been ChatGPT for YouTube, which will take, in the old days, I had to watch an entire hour-long conference talk on YouTube, right? Now I just press the summary button and I get a summary of that talk, and I don't have to watch the whole video because it just takes that text transcript and summarizes it. So that's been really useful to me, especially preparing for the show or just researching things in general. So definitely some useful products out there and a lot of garbage that'll disappear, or, people will try it out, put some money into it, won't live up to the hype. Hype is still pretty high for AI and for LLMs. And we had Auto GPT, Chaos GPT, Web GPT, Private GPT, all the GPTs. And that's continuing to evolve. So we'll probably still be talking a lot about AI and LLMs in 2024. All right, we had some drama in 2023. One of the biggest would be Silicon Valley Bank going under. A lot of VC-funded companies had their money in there. It happened very quickly, as a lot of this drama tends to happen these days. And nearly overnight, Silicon Valley Bank was insolvent. A few weeks later, I think we saw First Republic Bank go under also. So industry was very worried about, getting its money back and how far these runs on the banks, on these specialty banks, would continue. Fortunately, it didn't go too far, but Silicon Valley Bank still exists as a subsidiary of some other bank. I forget who. We stopped reporting on the story after things settled down. So I don't know the exact details of how that fell out, but ended up not being catastrophic for a large number of companies. But it was certainly worrying in the moment. Zscaler lost a spot on the Gartner quadrant due to sales arrogance. So there was a bunch of drama in the news about that. We already talked about several companies like Cybereason and Sneak losing a large amount of their value. Joe Sullivan ended up not getting any jail time. So it was interesting reporting on that and watching that from the beginning to the end. Merck's insurers have to pay them $1.4 billion for NotPetya. Took a couple years for that court case to wrap up. Their insurance, cyber insurance company, tried to say that it was an act of war, and therefore, there was an out. There was a clause in the insurance policy that said they didn't have to pay out. Courts didn't see their way. So that was an interesting moment in cyber insurance. Montana's governor banned TikTok. I haven't followed up on that. I can't imagine that's enforceable at all. We had somebody create a Stop Silly Security Awards website, which created a lot of drama. It was interesting. I'm in a Slack with a lot of product marketing and just general marketing folks in the cybersecurity arena. So it was really interesting to see their take, kind of the private inside take from people who do marketing and pay some of these awards companies for, awards you can argue they didn't really earn. But yeah, it was one of these things where, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It's probably all the awards probably don't need to go away, but some of them are definitely really bad. So that was some interesting drama to report on and talk about. The .zip domains. There's a lot of drama around that. A lot of companies feared them being used in attacks because you can now make a domain name sound like a file that you're downloading or vice versa. So a lot of companies blocked all .zip domains altogether, whereas a lot of other people, I feel like the vast majority of .zip domains were bought as jokes and will probably never become websites, just something that people own just to say, hey, I own, download.zip. So that was fun. Forbes also released a list of the top 200 most secure companies, which I think is one of the dumbest things that I saw published in 2023. Immediately puts a target on their back. There's a research project I may revisit. I already did a lot of the initial work. I already have a list of all 200 of these companies, and the idea of the project is, okay, these 200 most secure companies, how many of them have been hacked since this was published? Did it actually put a target on their back? So if that's something you want to see me report more on in the future, let me know, and I'll put some more time into that. Things we did not talk much about in 2023, the metaverse, NFTs, and crypto. We were sick of all three of those things by the end of 2022. Most of them seemed to go away. We saw a lot of VR headsets and AR headsets get canceled or discontinued, like the Microsoft HoloLens, a lot of Oculus's products. Facebook is putting Meta's putting a lot less time and money into meta things, to metaverse things. Ironic, since they changed their name to it. And yet there's still a lot of fraud and attacks against NFTs and against crypto. People are still losing tons of money, be it in some kind of virtual form or real form. So that all that stuff is still going on. It's just not newsworthy at this point. So it's no big events there worth really reporting on in 2023. And I think the biggest non-drama we saw, we thought there'd be some big drama around the MGM Sphere. It was turned on during DEF CON. We thought for sure people were going to try and hack it, and it was going to get hacked. And who knows what images were going to get thrown up on that Sphere. But the MGM Sphere survived DEF CON and the first Vegas GP, the Formula One GP that happened late last year in Vegas. We haven't seen any abuse of the MGM Sphere yet, which is kind of surprising. We expected it to be a target, and it survived. So kudos to whoever's providing security for the MGM Sphere on not getting that thing hacked or preventing it from getting hacked. So as we wrap up our year-end wrap-up, I just wanted to share a few of my favorites. So our favorite newsletters this year, certainly Mike Prevet's Return on Security newsletter informs a lot of the news that we talk about, particularly the fundings and the acquisitions, because he compiles all those, and you can go check out his newsletter. And we actually had him on as a guest, and we did kind of like a year-end roundup with him. I think that would have been episode 344. So just the most recent episode we did, I believe, was the one with Mike Prevet. And then Tyler Shields, one of our co-hosts, the Cyber Why, which I occasionally write for, is a great newsletter to check out. Katie Teitler-Centulo, also one of our co-hosts, has both of these are Substacks, the Cyber Why and the Reformed Analyst, which is her newsletter. Matt J came out with the Vulnerable You newsletter this year, which has some great content. I found Craig Balding's threat prompt really interesting, and it's just focused on attacks against LLMs for the most part. Some really, really interesting stuff in that one that helped me kind of keep up with the prompt injection, attacks against LLMs side of things as I'm putting together the news here. Daniel Meisler's Unsupervised Learning newsletter is also great. He's got a lot of good forward-looking futurist type essays, but also a lot of content focused on what you can currently do with a lot of this technology. So he personally likes to kind of push the limits of what some of this technology can do by testing it out himself, and playing with it himself, which makes for really good reading and makes his predictions much better quality, since he, the best way to get past the hype is to try things out for yourself, right? Clint Gibler's TLDRSec newsletter is always a good one to check out. And a special shout out to Kelly Shortridge's blog, which regularly kills it with both humor, balance between educational stuff, funny stuff, entertainment. Always good to check out. She usually does a buzzword bingo post early in the year, so I'm looking forward to that. She usually tries to get that out before RSA, so we'll probably see that in the coming months. And I look forward to all the content we'll see from these newsletters this year. Also from Kelly Shortridge, I wanted to call out some of my favorite security books this year, or just books in general from security folks. So Security Chaos Engineering is Kelly Shortridge's piece on getting more resiliency into InfoSec, which is, I mentioned the trend earlier, kind of moving out, that defenders seem to be moving away from pouring more and more time and money into prevention that never ends up preventing anything, and more into things that increase resilience, like testing your incident response policy or process, making it stronger, getting better at detecting attacks, and increasing visibility in general for security folks and SOCs. So that's a great book on that. I recommend checking that out for any defenders out there. And then 1% Leadership from Andy Ellis, another great book with, there's a lot of management in security, and it's not a security specific book. It's just a book on better leadership, better management. And almost every chapter in there is not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. There's a lot of advice in there that's counterintuitive. And then finally, my favorite tools. I did use ChatGPT a lot this year. I used that ChatGPT plugin for YouTube a lot this year. And I organized this whole show pretty much using Notion. So the script I'm reading right now, where I put it together, all that comes from Notion. So shout out to Notion for being a great tool in general for putting together workflows. And they do have AI in it, though I almost never use it. I should play around with it more. And it's something in general I think I need to do more in 2024 is spending more time with some of these new tools that are coming out and doing more testing myself. I'd also like to do more post-mortems, dig into more of these security failures. But you tell me, what were your favorite episodes this year? What kind of stuff did we do that you liked? Maybe tell me, what did we do a small amount of that you'd like to see more of? Maybe we did kind of a one-off episode that you really liked and you'd like us to use that format or do more interviews in that particular area more. Tell me what you're looking for. Tell me what you want. I would love to get any kind of input. If you want to send it to the show, leave it in a YouTube comment, send it to me on Twitter. I'm Zawa, S-A-W-A, on most social networks. There are many, many ways you can give us feedback. You can give feedback to Sec Weekly, SEC Weekly on Instagram, on Twitter, Security Weekly on LinkedIn. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. Lots of ways you can give me your thoughts and feedback on the show. So thanks to everyone watching or listening to this episode. We'll be back with our regular format on January 11th. See you there.